Guys, my name is Jason Chen, and welcome to my very first installment of my new YouTube channel, What I'm Reading. My purpose for making this channel is very simple. I'm trying to fix a very big problem that exists in the United States today. I think that the literature we produce now sucks. Really, really, really hard. Like, super hard. You know, you walk in the bookstore these days, and all you really find is very masturbatory self-help poetry, like the poetry produced by Ruby Carr and Courtney Peppernell. And you find really dry, polished turds that we call novels, written by MFAs from these really important MFA programs like University of Iowa and University of Michigan. And I was always bugged because I would walk into Barnes and Nobles or, an indie bookstore whenever I was in a new town. I'd open up these books by, the Ruby Carr poets and by the MFA novelists, and I'd be like, who the hell is reading this stuff? It's all so bad. And I've long been confused by why we publish bad things, because that shouldn't happen. We all like to read good books. No one likes to read bad books, and yet here we are with Ruby Carr, and I don't know, I'll name someone I think is a terrible MFA-style novelist, Celeste Ng. We end up with Celeste Ng, and it's still quite a mystery to me why we read all these bad books. But I figured out that one problem going on is that literary criticism has fallen quite hard. You look at the reviews on book jackets these days, and they are what a recent friend of mine has called puff pieces. Well, I shouldn't say recent friend, that makes her sound like she's passed away. She's just a friend I recently talked to. Anyways, so, you read literary reviews, and they're all just like spouting out these stock phrases. They'll call this book a tour de force, they'll call that book a magnum opus. It's all quite a big circle jerk. So no one is telling the truth when a book is bad, so the bad books end up on the bookshelves of all our big bookstores. So I've decided that one thing I'm going to do to fix this is to start my own literary criticism channel, so that hopefully the truth gets out there. That's my purpose, and I'd like to introduce this book I've been waving around, in the channel so far. So I'm going to officially introduce Milk, Blood, Heat by Dantiel W. Moniz. This is the very first book I am reviewing for this channel. It was published in February 2021. I'm not sure what day exactly, but quite recently, published by Grove Press. I really like. Published Frank O'Hara back when he was alive, and he's a poet very dear to my heart. Dantiel W. Moniz is a writer living in Northeast Florida currently, and she writes about Florida. And she has been published by many of the most important publications, literary journals, reviews, etc. So that includes the Paris Review, that includes Plowshares, Yale Review, McSweeney's. So, very big up-and-coming writer. This is a collection of short stories, mainly about girlhood and womanhood in the part of Florida that she grew up in. So you have a lot of stories, like her first story, the eponymous tale of Milk, Blood, Heat. Milk, Blood, Heat, that's the name of the story. I'm not sure if eponymous is a word commonly understood, so had to explain myself a little bit there. So the eponymous story, Milk, Blood, Heat, is about this girl going through puberty, and she starts feeling quite satanic, and she thinks about blood a lot, and she has this friend who's also feeling quite sexy lately. I can't remember the details of the story, because I'll be quite honest, I think that the central story of this book, Milk, Blood, Heat, is quite boring. And that gets us to the main point of today's review, I think Milk Blood Heat tries really hard to be edgy because it has nothing to say. Long story short, if you needed any takeaway from today's video, it would be that Milk Blood Heat is very boring. You shouldn't read it. It's not that good. So the main themes of this book include, once again, the temptations one feels when one goes through the trials of female puberty. So you develop this beautiful body. It's hard to control. It's hard to control your urges. You develop the power to tempt men in your school, boys in your school. A lot of these stories about the dissatisfaction of marriage. And the book also touches on moral corruption and degeneration, the part of Florida that this writer grew up in. My problem with this book is that she talks about a lot of very universal experiences, once again, like puberty and marriage. So she's not really writing about any new crazy experience, and that's okay. Some books can just be about those typical, normal, universal experiences that everyone goes through. You know, one of my favorite books is Dubliners by James Joyce, and he also touches on, you know, not any fantastic, heroic epics. He just also touches on what it's like to grow up, once again, to also experience puberty, to also experience the dissatisfaction of marriage. What makes this book really boring is that the author doesn't really celebrate that universality or condemn it. You know, she doesn't say, like Jack Kerouac, why are we all doing the same conformist thing? Why don't we all go live life? Why don't we go travel? Why don't we go see Mexico? Why don't we burst like fireworks in the sky? Why don't we live with passion? So she's not saying that. She's not saying the James Joyce thing either about how beautiful and heroic it is to just exist in the everyday, you know, to grow a year older every year, to go to work, to have a wife, to have a kid, to wrestle with normal everyday matters like alcoholism or the dissatisfaction of marriage. So, you know, you have Jack Kerouac, who condemns doing what everyone does, and you have James Joyce, who celebrates the tragic, heroic poetry of just being a normal person. So Dantiel W. Moniz, she doesn't really take a stance on either. She just kind of complains, you know, when one of her characters goes through puberty, that character will complain. When a character is 16, that character will complain about being 16. When a character is married, that character will complain about being married, without any real intense stance. Neither the celebratory nor the condemnation, just this really petty, shallow complaining. She hides the fact that she has nothing to say by constantly throwing in these really edgy, quasi-satanic images and notions. You know, there are these characters dangling Barbie dolls as if they're conducting some kind of voodoo ritual. And there's this one girl at one point in the book who thinks about burning a church down. Once again, very edgy. And what's sort of disappointing is that the girl doesn't even burn the church down. At least that would make a story. But no, she considers it, and then she doesn't do it. I thought that was lame. I'd rather she go through with it if she's going to be, you know, dabbling with the dark side. I'd rather see characters fully immerse themselves in the dark side so we can at least learn something from their immersion in the dark side so that we don't go there ourselves. But this character doesn't even go there. How wimpy. The two stories I thought were slightly interesting were Thicker Than Water and Exotics. My battery's running low, so you might have heard. a sound come from my laptop, and that's okay. So Thicker Than Water is about this woman who goes with her brother and her brother's girlfriend on this weird road trip to Santa Fe. Their mother commands them to do so. It's part of some mourning process for the family because their father is dead. And Thicker Than Water is interesting because there's this character, the brother's girlfriend, and she's very not boring. Everyone else in this book is boring. She's not boring. She's a webcam model, but even though she lives this life of licentiousness and sin, she's actually quite smart. And she says some of the wisest things in this book. You know, she says that she spends a lot of her time going on Wikipedia and going on Reddit, learning about life, and she describes how the quote, blood is thicker than water might have been totally meant to say something else by the people from a long time ago who came up with that proverb. And she's full of a sort of wisdom that most of the other characters are lacking because most of the other characters in this book are very boring. The other story that I thought was interesting was Exotics. There's just very intense imagery. I guess I'll spoil it for you. It's about these really rich men in, once again, a very morally degenerate part of Florida, and they're really bored, as rich people are, and so they spend their time eating really exotic animals. You know, like, this isn't an example straight from the book, but, you know, like eating jaguar meat or crane burgers, weird things like that. I'm just coming up with what they might eat. They're not examples straight from the book. So that part of this book is just like, what the heck? It gets a shock out of you, definitely. Found those two stories, Milk, Blood, Heat, I would not recommend. It's part of that whole complex of bad books that somehow get good reviews, so they end up on the bookshelves. And that concludes my first review. You will be hearing more from me. Please let me know if you have any comments or questions about the book. And thank you for tuning in to what I'm reading.